Killian Reyes stood by the window of his luxury penthouse, looking down at the glittering city lights. His expensive black suit couldn't hide the dangerous air about him. At 35, he was the most feared enforcer in the city's underworld. Tonight he had a meeting that would change everything. "Mr. Davidson is here to see you," his security guard announced. Robert Davidson walked in, every inch the wealthy businessman in his tailored suit. But Killian knew better. Like many of the city's elite, Davidson had dark secrets, and he came to people like Killian when he needed something handled quietly. "I have an unusual job for you," Davidson said, pulling out a photo. "This is Emilia Carter." Killian looked at the picture. The woman was young, maybe 25, with long brown hair and a gentle smile. She was nothing like the hard-edged people he usually dealt with. "She's my business rival's daughter," Davidson explained. "I want you to make her fall in love with you." Killian raised an eyebrow. "That's not my usual kind of work." Davidson smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "I'm offering $5 million. Make her fall for you, then break her heart. It'll destroy her father. He'll be so busy taking care of his precious daughter that he won't see me coming for his company." "Why me?" "Because you're good-looking enough to attract her, but cold enough to break her without feeling bad about it. Everyone knows Killian Reyes doesn't have a heart." Killian looked at the photo again. The girl seemed so innocent, so different from his world of violence and lies. But $5 million was $5 million. "I'll need information about her," he said. Davidson handed him a file. "She's an art teacher at the community center, loves painting and poetry, volunteers at the animal shelter on weekends. She's painfully naive, lives alone, and hasn't dated much. Should be easy for someone like you." Killian took the file. "How long?" 3 months. I want her completely in love with you by then, and when you break her heart, I want it to be devastating." After Davidson left, Killian studied Emilia's photo more carefully. She had kind eyes, the sort that probably saw good in everyone. He almost felt sorry for what he was about to do to her. The next day, Killian went to the community center. He watched Emilia teaching an art class to senior citizens, her face lighting up as she helped them with their paintings. She wore a simple dress with paint stains on it, and her hair was pulled back in a messy bun. She looked even more innocent in person. "Excuse me," he said, walking in after the class ended. "I heard you give private art lessons?" Emilia turned around, and for a moment Killian forgot this was just another job. She had the warmest smile he'd ever seen. "Oh, yes, I do," she said, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Are you interested in learning to paint?" "I am. I've always wanted to try it," but he gave her his most charming smile, the one that usually got him whatever he wanted. "I'm afraid I might be hopeless." She laughed, and the sound was so genuine it caught him off guard. "Nobody's hopeless. Art is about expressing yourself, not being perfect." As she talked about lesson times and materials, Killian noticed how her eyes lit up when she talked about painting. She was exactly like Davidson said, trusting, open, wearing her heart on her sleeve. This should be an easy job, he thought. Get close to her, make her fall in love, then crush her. He'd done worse things for less money, but something felt different this time. Maybe it was the way she looked at him without fear or suspicion. Maybe it was how she talked about finding beauty in everything, even the darkness. "Shall we start next week?" she asked hopefully. Killian nodded, knowing he'd just taken the first step in destroying this innocent woman's life. Next week sounds perfect. As he walked back to his car, he pushed away the unfamiliar feeling of guilt. He was Killian Reyes. He didn't feel guilt. He didn't feel anything. But he couldn't shake the feeling that this job was going to be different, that somehow this sweet art teacher with paint-stained hands and dreams in her eyes might be more dangerous to him than any enemy he'd ever faced. Because while he knew exactly how to break hearts, he'd never met anyone who might be capable of touching his. This art studio smelled like paint and coffee. Emilia had set up an easel for Killian, and sunlight streamed through the big windows. She watched as he struggled with the brush, pretending to be worse at painting than he really was. "Here, let me help," she said, stepping closer. Her hand touched his as she guided the brush, and Killian felt something strange in his chest. Nobody in his world ever touched him so casually, so without fear. "You're actually doing better than most beginners," she encouraged him. You have a good eye for detail. If she only knew what kind of details he usually looked for. Weaknesses, vulnerabilities, ways to hurt people. But when she smiled at him, like that he almost forgot who he was. 3 weeks had passed since his first lesson. He'd been careful, playing the role of a businessman interested in art. He told her he worked in private security consulting, which wasn't exactly a lie. He dressed down for their lessons, wearing casual clothes that still probably cost more than she made in a month. What made you want to learn painting? She asked during their break. Killian had a story ready. He always did. But looking at her honest face, he found himself telling a different truth. I've spent my whole life focused on work, he said, making money, being successful. But lately I've been thinking there might be more to life than that. Emilia's eyes softened. There is. So much more. Beauty, creativity, connection. She blushed slightly. Sorry, I probably sound silly to someone like you. No, he said, surprising himself. You don't sound silly at all. After the lesson, he watched her clean up the studio. She hummed while she worked, completely unself-conscious. Everything about her was real. Her smile, her enthusiasm, her kindness. In his world, everyone wore masks, played games, had angles they were working. His phone buzzed. A text from Davidson. Progress report? Killian typed back. Going according to plan. Building trust, but was it going according to plan? He was supposed to be seducing her, but their conversations felt more real than any he'd had in years. When she talked about art and beauty, he found himself actually listening. The next day, he had to handle some business for the syndicate. A shop owner who hadn't paid his protection money needed convincing. As Killian stood there, watching his men rough up the old man, he thought about Emilia. What would she think if she knew what he really was? Please, the shop owner begged. I have a family. Usually, Killian felt nothing during these jobs, but today, something felt off. He found himself telling his men to ease up, giving the owner an extra week to pay. His second-in-command, Marco, looked at him strangely. You feeling okay, boss? You've been different lately. I'm fine, Killian snapped. But was he? That evening, he went to the community center to watch Emilia's class without her knowing. She was teaching kids this time, helping a little boy who was crying because his painting didn't look right. Art isn't about being perfect, she told the boy, her voice gentle. It's about putting your heart into it. And I can see so much heart in your painting. The boy stopped crying and smiled. Killian watched as Emilia praised each child's work, making them feel special, seen. She had a gift for seeing the good in things, in people, even in him, though she had no idea what kind of man she was really dealing with. After class, he saw her walking to her car alone. The parking lot was dark, and he noticed two rough-looking men watching her. Without thinking, he stepped out of the shadows, making sure they saw him. They recognized him immediately. Everyone in the criminal world knew Killian Reyes. They quickly walked away. Emilia never knew she'd been in danger. She never knew he'd protected her, just like she'd never know that he was being paid to break her heart. But as he watched her drive away, Killian realized he had a bigger problem than the two thugs in the parking lot. Because for the first time in his life, his heart wasn't following his plan. He took out his phone and looked at Davidson's text again. 3 more weeks had passed. The clock was ticking. Soon, he'd have to move things forward, start the reel. Seduction begin breaking her heart. But standing there in the dark parking lot, Killian Reyes, the man who didn't believe in love, admitted something to himself that scared him more than any enemy ever had. He was starting to care about Emilia Carter, and that was the most dangerous thing that could happen, for both of them. It was a rainy Sunday afternoon when everything started to change. Killian was driving past the animal shelter, where he knew Emilia volunteered when he saw her struggling with some heavy bags of dog food in the rain. Without thinking, he pulled over. Need some help? He called out, grabbing an umbrella. Emilia's face lit up when she saw him. She was soaking wet but still smiling. Killian, what are you doing here? Just passing by, he lied, taking the bags from her. Let me help you get these inside. Inside the shelter, dogs barked excitedly. Emilia led him to the storage room, apologizing for the mess. I usually have help on Sundays, but my regular volunteer is sick. I could stay, Killian heard himself say, if you need an extra pair of hands. Her whole face brightened. Really? You wouldn't mind? That's how Killian Reyes, feared enforcer of the city's most dangerous crime syndicate, spent his Sunday afternoon walking dogs and cleaning kennels. His expensive shoes were ruined, and his clothes smelled like wet dog. But something strange happened. He enjoyed it. Amelia showed him how to approach the nervous dogs, how to earn their trust. "See," she said, watching him pet a three-legged pit bull. "They can sense when someone has a good heart." Killian almost laughed at that if she only knew. "This one's my favorite," Amelia said, leading him to a cage where an old, scarred German shepherd lay. "Nobody wants him because of his scars, but he's the sweetest dog here. People judge too quickly based on appearances." Killian felt something twist in his chest. The dog looked up at him with knowing eyes, and he saw himself, scarred, dangerous, unwanted, except for what he could do for others. "What's his name?" he asked. "Ghost," Amelia said softly, "because he survived so much." Later, as they sat sharing coffee from the shelter's ancient vending machine, Amelia told him about her life. Her mother had died when she was young. Her father, James Carter, was always busy with his company, leaving her to raise herself. "That's why I love teaching art," she explained. "It helped me through the lonely times. Now I can help others find that same comfort." Killian thought about Davidson's plan to destroy her father's company, about how this sweet, strong woman was just a pawn in a rich man's game of revenge. His phone buzzed. Another text from Davidson. "Time to move things along. Ask her out properly." Killian looked at Amelia, who was trying to wipe dog slobber off his expensive jacket while apologizing profusely. She was nothing like the sophisticated women he usually dated for show. She was real, pure, everything he wasn't. "Would you like to have dinner with me?" he asked, cutting off her apologies. Not as student and teacher, as more. The blush that spread across her cheeks made him forget about Davidson, about the job, about everything except how beautiful she looked right then. "I'd like that," she said softly. That night, Killian couldn't sleep. He went to his private gym in his penthouse, hitting the punching bag until his knuckles bled, trying to beat some sense into himself. This was a job, just a job. But when he finally fell into bed, exhausted, he dreamed of paint-stained hands and gentle smiles. He dreamed of a woman who saw good in everything, even in him. He dreamed of a life he could never have. The next morning, Marco came to report some syndicate business. "Boss, we've got trouble with the Martinez cartel. They're moving into our territory." Usually this would be Killian's focus. Territory wars, power plays, violence, this was his world. But all he could think about was his dinner date with Amelia tomorrow night. "Handle it," he told Marco. "Just don't kill anyone unless absolutely necessary." Marco stared at him. "You feeling okay, boss? First you let that shop owner slide, now this?" "I said handle it," Killian snapped, but inside he was asking himself the same question. Was he okay? Because the man who'd taken Davidson's job 2 months ago wouldn't recognize the man he was becoming. That afternoon, he went back to the shelter alone. He found Ghost's cage and stood there, looking at the scarred dog who'd survived so much. "What do you think?" he asked the dog quietly. "Can someone like me change, or am I just fooling myself?" Ghost got up and pressed against the cage, letting Killian pet him. Those knowing eyes seemed to see right through him, just like Amelia's did. 2 hours later, Killian Reyes, the man who destroyed lives for a living, filled out adoption papers for a scarred German shepherd. The shelter worker looked shocked when she ran his background check and saw his pristine record, carefully manufactured, of course. "Ghost doesn't usually like men," she said, "but he seems to trust you." Trust. Such a simple word, such an impossible thing in his world. As he drove home with Ghost in his back seat, Killian's phone rang. It was Davidson. "Remember," Davidson said without preamble, "you're not there to save dogs and play artist. You have a job to do. Don't make me regret choosing you." Killian hung up without answering. In his rearview mirror, he saw Ghost watching. Him and those eyes reminded him of Amelia's, full of trust he didn't deserve. Tomorrow night he would take her to dinner. He would start the real seduction, begin the process of breaking her heart. That was the job. But as he looked at the scarred dog who'd somehow trusted him, Killian wondered if his own heart might end up being the one that broke. Killian picked Emilia up for their first real date in his black Mercedes. She came out wearing a simple blue dress, looking nervous but happy. Ghost, who now lived in Killian's penthouse, had helped him pick out flowers for her. Roses seemed too calculated, so he'd chosen wildflowers instead. "These are beautiful," she said, breathing in their scent. Most men just grab roses without thinking. He'd made reservations at the city's most exclusive restaurant, but at the last minute, he changed his mind. "How do you feel about Italian?" "I know a small place in Little Italy." Her face relaxed. "That sounds perfect. Fancy restaurants make me nervous." The restaurant was family-owned, with checkered tablecloths and candles in wine bottles. The owner, Mario, greeted them warmly, not because he feared Killian like most people did, but because Killian had helped his daughter out of an abusive relationship years ago. It was one of the few truly good things he'd done with his power. "Your usual table, Mr. Reyes?" Mario asked, leading them to a quiet corner. Over homemade pasta and wine, Emilia told him about her dreams. She wanted to open her own art therapy center someday, helping troubled kids and veterans heal through creativity. Her eyes sparkled when she talked about it. "My father thinks it's a waste of time," she admitted. "He wants me to join his company, but that's not me. I'm not built for the corporate world." Killian thought about her father, about Davidson's plan to destroy him. He should be gathering this information, using it. Instead, he found himself saying, "You should follow your dreams. The world needs more beauty, more healing." She looked at him with those clear, trusting eyes. "What about your dreams? What did you want to be before you got into security work?" The question caught him off guard. Nobody had asked him that in years. "I wanted to be an architect," he admitted, surprising himself with the truth. "I used to draw buildings all the time as a kid." What happened? Life happened, he thought. Violence and survival and climbing to the top of a very dark mountain. "Sometimes we make choices," he said carefully, "and those choices lead us down paths we never expected." Her hand touched his across the table. It's never too late to change paths. The simple touch, the genuine belief in her voice, it shook, something loose inside him. For a moment he let himself imagine a different life, one where he really was just a businessman learning art, falling for his beautiful teacher. After dinner they walked through Little Italy's streets. The summer night was warm, and music drifted from open windows. When Emilia stumbled slightly on the cobblestones, Killian caught her arm. She fit against him perfectly, and neither of them pulled away. "Dance with me," she said suddenly, gesturing to where an old man was playing violin on the corner. "Here? In the street?" Her smile was mischievous. "Why not? Life's too short to wait for perfect moments. Sometimes we have to make them." So Killian Reyes, who only ever danced at charity galas where he was sizing up targets, danced with Emilia Carter on a street corner in Little Italy. She laughed when he spun her, and the sound made his heart do things it had no business doing. The violin player watched, them with knowing eyes playing something soft and sweet. People walked by smiling at the couple dancing under the streetlights. For a few minutes, Killian felt normal, clean, worthy of the way she looked at him. Then his phone buzzed. Davidson, reality. Crashed back. This wasn't real, none of it could be real. He was here to destroy this woman's life, not dance with her in the streets. "Everything okay?" Emilia asked, noticing his change in mood. "Just work," he said, forcing a smile. "Let me take you home." Outside, her small apartment, she turned to him. In the soft porch light, she looked like something from another world, a world of light and goodness he could never belong to. "I had a wonderful time," she said softly. He should kiss her. That was the plan. Start the physical seduction. Davidson would expect progress, but looking at her innocent face, Killian couldn't do it. Not like this. Not as part of a job. Instead, he brought her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. "Good night, Emilia." Her blush followed him all the way home, where Ghost waited eagerly for his return. The dog took one look at him and whined sympathetically, as if understanding his master's turmoil. "What am I doing, boy?" Killian asked, sinking into his expensive leather couch. Ghost put his head in Killian's lap, offering silent comfort. His phone rang again. Davidson. You're taking too long, Davidson said when he answered. I'm not paying you to court her like a gentleman. Get it done. These things take time, Killian said, his voice hard. You want her devastated? Then let me do it my way. But even as he said it, he knew he was stalling, because every day that passed, every moment with Amelia, made the thought of hurting her more impossible. Later that night, unable to sleep, Killian went to his home gym. But instead of hitting the punching bag, he found himself picking up a pencil and paper. For the first time in 20 years, he started to draw. He drew buildings at first, like he used to. Then, without meaning to, he drew Amelia dancing under the streetlights, her face full of joy and trust. Looking at the drawing, Killian finally admitted what he'd been avoiding. He was falling in love with his target. And in his world, love wasn't just dangerous, it was deadly. Because sooner or later Amelia would discover the truth. And when she did, she wouldn't just be devastated, she'd be destroyed. Just like Davidson wanted, unless Killian could find a way out. For both of them, a month had passed since their first date, and Killian was living two lives. In one, he was still the feared enforcer, handling the syndicate's brutal business. In the other, he was falling deeper in love with Amelia, spending evenings at art classes, weekends at the shelter, and every free moment thinking about her. Tonight he sat in a dark warehouse watching his men interrogate a rival gang member. The man's face was bloody, but he wouldn't talk. "Boss," Marco said, "want us to get serious with him?" Before, Killian would have nodded without hesitation. Now he heard Amelia's voice in his head, talking about kindness and second chances. "Let him go," Killian said. "What?" Marco stared at him. "Send a message to his boss. Tell him next time we won't be so generous, but let him go." The rival gang member looked at Killian with confused gratitude as Marco's men untied him. Killian knew he was getting soft, knew it was dangerous, but he couldn't be the same man he was before Amelia. His phone rang. It was her. "Can you come over?" she asked, her voice shaky. "I know it's late, but what's wrong?" He was already moving toward his car. "My father, we had a huge fight about the art therapy center. He said some really harsh things." 20 minutes later, Killian was at her door. Her eyes were red from crying, but she still tried to smile when she saw him. Inside her small apartment, surrounded by her paintings and the warm, creative chaos of her life, Killian held her while she cried. She told him how her father had called her dreams childish, how he'd threatened to cut her off if she didn't join his company. "Maybe he's right," she whispered. "Maybe I'm being stupid." "No," Killian said firmly. "You're not stupid. You're the most genuine person I've ever met." She looked up at him, her face close to his. "How do you always know the right thing to say?" "Because I was paid to seduce you," he thought with self-loathing. "Because I studied you, learned what you needed to hear." But the truth was, everything he said to her now came from his heart. When she kissed him, it felt like coming home, like finding something he'd been searching for his whole life without knowing it. Her lips were soft, hesitant at first, then more certain. Killian kissed her back with all the gentleness he'd never known he possessed. "Stay," she whispered against his lips. "Please." He should say no, should keep his distance. But he was tired of fighting his feelings for her. That night they just held each other, fully clothed on her small couch. Killian stroked her hair while she slept, looking at the paintings on her walls, landscapes, portraits, and one that caught his eye. It was Ghost, the scarred dog he'd adopted, painted with so much detail and care that it brought tears to his eyes. "I painted him the day after you adopted him," Amelia murmured, half asleep. "The way you looked at him, that's when I started falling in love with you." Killian's heart stopped. Love. She loved him, and he loved her back so much it terrified him. His phone buzzed. Davidson. He ignored it. The next morning, Killian went straight to his office and called an emergency meeting with his most trusted men. He had millions stashed away, connections all over the world. Maybe, just maybe, he could find a way out. I need options, he told them. Ways to disappear, ways to protect someone from powerful people. His men looked nervous. Nobody just walked away from their world, but they started making calls, pulling strings. Then Marco burst in. Boss, we've got trouble. Big trouble. Davidson had called a meeting of the syndicate's top leaders. He was making moves threatening to expose some of Killian's past deals if he didn't comply with their original agreement. He's getting impatient, Marco said. Word is, he's going to move against Carter's company next week, once that happens. Once that happened, Amelia would lose everything. Her father would be ruined. And eventually she would discover Killian's role in it all. Killian looked at his phone. 3 missed calls from Davidson. A text message. Meeting. Tonight. Don't make me your enemy. Then a message from Amelia. Thank you for last night. For everything. You make me feel safe. Safe. The word was like a knife in his heart. That afternoon, he went to the shelter. Ghost was with him. The dog rarely left his side now. He found Amelia teaching an art therapy class to troubled teens. She was showing them how to mix colors, how to express their pain through painting. Art helps us face our demons, she was saying. It helps us find beauty, even in the darkest places. One of the teens, a tough-looking boy with gang tattoos, was painting what looked like a prison cell. But in his painting, light streamed through the window, turning the bars into something almost beautiful. Killian watched, hidden, as Amelia praised the boy's work. She was changing lives, one painting at a time, just like she'd changed his. Ghost whined softly, drawing Amelia's attention. Her whole face lit up when she saw Killian. 2 surprises in one, she said, hugging them both. I was just telling my students about how art can transform lives. Transform lives. Could his life be transformed? Could he really leave behind everything he was, everything he'd done? Looking at Amelia with her paint-stained hands and loving heart, Killian made his decision. He would find a way to stop Davidson, to protect Amelia and her father, to become the man she believed he was. Even if it meant risking everything, even if it meant facing all his demons at once, because Amelia Carter had taught him something more valuable than all his millions. She'd taught him that even the darkest heart could learn to love. Now he just had to figure out how to keep that love from destroying them both. The meeting with Davidson was set for midnight at his private club. Killian arrived early, his mind racing with plans and backup plans. Ghost had sensed his tension all day, staying closer than usual, as if trying to protect him. Davidson sat at his usual table drinking expensive scotch. His smile was cold when he saw Killian. "You're getting sloppy," Davidson said without greeting. "My sources tell me you've actually fallen for the girl." "Your sources are wrong," Killian lied smoothly. "Everything's going according to plan." "Really?" Davidson slid a folder across the table. "Then explain these." Inside were photos. Killian dancing with Amelia in Little Italy. Killian at the shelter watching her teach. Killian holding her on her couch, their kiss. "You were supposed to seduce and destroy her," Davidson said, his voice hard, "not play house with her." "I'm gaining her trust," Killian said, "making it more devastating when I break her heart." Davidson laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You know what I think? I think the great Killian Reyes has gone soft. Fallen in love with his target. How pathetic." Killian's hands itched to grab Davidson by the throat. Instead, he took a slow sip of his drink. "What do you want?" "End it. Tomorrow. Break her heart so completely she never recovers. Or I'll destroy both of you." "You're threatening me?" Killian's voice was deadly quiet. "No, I'm motivating you. Because if you don't do your job, I'll tell her everything. How you were paid to make her fall in love with you. How you laughed about how easy it was to fool her. And then, while she's dealing with that betrayal, I'll destroy her father's company and leave them both with nothing." Killian stood up slowly. "You're making a mistake." "No, you're the one making a mistake if you think you can cross me. Tomorrow, Killian. Or everyone learns what kind of monster you really are." Killian left the club with ice in his veins. His men were waiting outside with news. They'd found dirt on Davidson. Evidence of crimes even the syndicate wouldn't forgive. But using it would start a war. His phone lit up with a message from Amelia. "Come over. I made dinner. Nothing fancy, but I've been practicing that pasta recipe Mario taught me." His heart ached. Every message from her was so full of light, so trusting. She had no idea her whole world was about to shatter. When he got to her apartment, she was wearing an apron covered in tomato sauce. The small kitchen smelled amazing, and she'd set the table with candles. "I have something to tell you," she said, looking nervous but happy. "What is it?" "I talked to my father again. Really talked. I showed him my plans for the art therapy center, showed him the results we're getting with the Troubled Teens program, and he's going to help me start it. He's even offering to fund it." Killian felt sick. Her father was about to lose everything, and she didn't even know. "That's not all," she continued, taking his hand. "I've been offered a chance to study art therapy techniques in Paris for 6 months. It's an amazing opportunity, and I want you to come with me." She looked at him with so much hope, so much love. "You could paint, maybe even study architecture, like you wanted. We could start fresh together. Paris, a fresh start, a normal life, everything he'd never let himself dream of." "Amelia," his voice broke. She must have seen something in his face because her smile faded. "What's wrong?" He could do what Davidson wanted. Break her heart, make her hate him. Jed would destroy her, but at least she'd be alive. Davidson had enemies, powerful ones. If Killian played this right, maybe he could protect her from the fallout, or he could tell her the truth. Risk everything. Trust that the love they'd found was strong enough to survive his darkest secrets. Ghost, who'd been lying quietly in the corner, got up and came to press against his leg. The scarred dog looked up at him with those knowing eyes, reminding him of the day Amelia said people could change. "Sit down," he said quietly. "There's something I need to tell you." "You're scaring me," she said, but she sat. Killian took a deep breath. He'd faced down rival gangs, corrupt cops, and killers without flinching, but nothing had ever terrified him like the thought of losing her. 3 months ago, a man named Robert Davidson hired me to make you fall in love with me. He's your father's enemy, and he wanted to hurt him by hurting you. I took the job because that's what I do. I hurt people for money." Amelia's face went white. She started to stand, but he held up his hand. "Please let me finish, because while everything about how we met was a lie, everything that happened after wasn't. I fell in love with you, Amelia. Real, terrifying, life-changing love. And now Davidson is threatening to destroy both you and your father unless I break your heart tomorrow." Tears were streaming down her face. "So all of this, was just a job." "It started that way. But you changed everything. You made me want to be better, to be the man you thought I was." "Who are you?" she whispered. "Really?" The moment of truth. "I'm not just in security, I'm an enforcer for the city's largest crime syndicate. I've done terrible things, hurt people, ruined lives, but I've never felt guilty about any of it until I met you." Amelia stood up so fast her chair fell over. Ghost whined, moving between them as if trying to keep the peace. "Get out," she said, her voice shaking. "Get out right now. Amelia, please, get out." Killian stood slowly. "Davidson will move against your father's company tomorrow. I'm going to try to stop him, but you need to be ready. Get your father. To move his money, protect his assets." She was crying too hard to speak. Killian wanted to hold her, to beg for forgiveness, to promise he would fix everything. Instead, he walked to the door. "I love you," he said softly. That part was always real. Her only response was a sob that broke his heart. Outside her building, Killian made a call. "Marco, get everyone together. Tonight we go to war." Because while he might have lost Amelia forever, he could still protect her, even if it meant burning his whole world to the ground. The night exploded into chaos. Killian's men moved fast, hitting Davidson's businesses one after another. They found proof of his illegal dealings, his secret accounts, everything they needed to destroy him. But Davidson wasn't going down without a fight. "Boss, we've got trouble!" Marco burst into Killian's office. "Davidson's men are heading to Carter Industries. They're armed." Killian grabbed his gun. "Call the police, anonymous tip, tell them about an armed robbery in progress." "The police? Since when do we just do it?" As Killian raced through the city streets, his phone rang. "Emilia, Davidson's men are here," she whispered. "At my father's office, they have guns." Killian's heart stopped. "What are you doing there?" "I came to warn Dad about what you told me. We were moving files, getting ready to run, and then they burst in." "Hey," man's voice in the background. "Hey, who are you talking to?" The line went dead. Killian pressed the gas pedal harder. Ghost in the passenger seat growled low in his throat as if sensing the danger ahead. At Carter Industries, Davidson's men had already broken in. Killian could see movement on the top floor where James Carter's office was. Police sirens wailed in the distance, but they'd be too late. "Stay," he told Ghost, but the dog ignored him, following as he slipped into the building through a service entrance. They took the stairs, Killian's gun ready. On the top floor, he heard voices from Carter's office. "Sign the papers," Davidson was saying. "Sign everything over to me or your daughter dies first." Killian peered around the corner. Davidson had 5 men with him. James Carter sat at his desk, face pale but defiant. Emilia stood against the wall, a gun pointed at her head, but her eyes showed more anger than fear. "Even if I sign," Carter said, "you'll kill us anyway." Davidson laughed. "True, but this way hurts more. Watching your empire crumble before you. Die." Killian had choices to make. He could call his men, start a war right here, but that would put Emilia in more danger. He could try to shoot his way in, but the odds weren't good. Then he saw Emilia's eyes meet his across the room. In that moment, something passed between them. Trust, understanding, love. She moved suddenly, knocking a vase off a table. In the split second of distraction, Killian burst in, Ghost at his side. The dog launched himself at the nearest gunman while Killian took out 2 more. Chaos erupted. Guns fired, glass shattered. Ghost's fierce growls mixed with shouts and screams. "Run!" Killian yelled to Emilia and her father, but Emilia didn't run. Instead, she grabbed a heavy art piece from her father's wall and swung it at one of Davidson's men. The man went down hard. Davidson himself pulled a gun, aiming at Emilia. "You should have done your job, Killian." 3 shots rang out. Davidson's eyes went wide as red bloomed on his chest. He looked surprised as he fell. Behind him stood James Carter, holding a gun with steady hands. "Nobody threatens my daughter." Police sirens were very close now. Killian knew he had to leave. His world and Emilia's couldn't mix, no matter how much he loved her. "Go," she said softly, understanding in her eyes. "We'll tell them Davidson's—" Men fought each other. He wanted to hold her one last time, to beg for forgiveness again. Instead, he whistled for Ghost and turned to leave. "Killian," she called after him. He stopped but didn't turn. "Was any of it real? The art classes, the shelter, the dancing?" "All of it," he said. "Every moment with you was real." Then he was gone, disappearing into the night, just as police cars flooded the street below. Back at his penthouse, Killian started making calls. His men had enough evidence to destroy what was left of Davidson's organization. James Carter's company would be safe now. Ghost lay at his feet, bandaged but proud. The dog had fought like a warrior tonight, protecting the people his master loved. "We have to leave, boy," Killian told him. "Too many questions now, too many people know my face." His phone buzzed with a message from Emilia. "The police are gone. Dad told them Davidson tried to force him to sign over the company, and Davidson's men turned on each other. They found enough evidence in his office to prove he was corrupt." Another message followed. "I'm still angry. I don't know if I can ever forgive the lie. But I understand why you told me the truth and what you did tonight." Killian waited, heart pounding. "I'm going to Paris next week to study art therapy like I planned. I hear it's a good place for someone to start over. If they wanted to." Hope bloomed in his chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe a chance. One last message came through. "They say art helps us face our demons. Maybe it's time you faced yours, with someone who sees the good in you." Killian looked around his luxury penthouse, at all the trappings of his dark life. Then he looked at Ghost, who tilted his head as if to say, "Well, what are you waiting for? Sometimes love means taking chances. Sometimes it means facing your demons. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it means finding someone who sees past your scars to who you could be." Killian started packing, Paris in autumn was nothing like Killian had imagined. The streets were full of artists, musicians, and people, living life at a slower pace. He'd been there 2 weeks living in a small apartment in Montmartre, with Ghost as his only companion. He hadn't contacted Emilia since arriving. She knew he was there. His men had made sure she got his new address, but he was giving her space. Every morning he walked Ghost through the artistic quarter, watching painters set up their easels in the square. Sometimes he sketched too, sitting at tiny cafes with Ghost at his feet. His drawings were getting better. He'd even signed up for proper art classes at a local studio. Marco called regularly with updates. The syndicate was reorganizing after Davidson's death. Some wanted Killian to come back and take control. He always said, "No, you're really done," Marco asked during their last call. "Just like that?" "Just like that," Killian confirmed, watching an old couple dance to street music. "My money's clean now, invested legally. The rest of it, it's your problem now." He'd kept enough to live. Comfortably, but not in luxury. His new apartment could fit in the living room of his old penthouse. Somehow it felt more like home. One rainy morning, Ghost started barking excitedly during their walk. Killian turned and saw her, Emilia standing under a red umbrella, watching him. His heart stopped. She looked different, stronger. Her hair was shorter, and she carried herself with new confidence. "I saw you sketching here yesterday," she said, "but I wasn't ready to talk. And today I'm ready." They found a quiet cafe. Ghost lay between them, head resting on Emilia's feet. Like no time had passed. She looked around at the small space, so different from the expensive restaurants he used to take her to. "You've changed," she said. "I'm trying to." She pulled something from her bag, a sketchbook. Inside were drawings of the troubled teens from her art therapy classes back home. "They ask about you sometimes, and Ghost, especially Tommy, the boy who painted the prison cell. How are they doing?" "Better. Dad's funding helped us expand the program. We're even working with the juvenile detention center now." She paused. "He asks about you too, you know. Dad. After what happened with Davidson, he did some digging, found out about other times you'd helped people, the shop owners you protected, the abused women you helped escape." Killian looked down at his coffee. "It doesn't make up for the bad things I did." "No," she agreed, "it doesn't, but it shows who you really are, under all the darkness." She reached into her bag again and pulled out a folded paper, the drawing he'd done of her dancing in Little Italy. "Marco gave me this, said he found it in your office after you left." "Emilia," he started, but she held up her hand. "Let me finish. When I found out the truth, I was devastated. Not just because of the lie, but because I thought it meant none of it was real. The way you looked at my paintings, how you were with the dogs at the shelter, the stories you told me about wanting to be an architect. I thought it was all fake." "It wasn't," he said softly. "That was the real me, maybe for the first time in my life." She touched the drawing gently. "I know. That's why I'm here. Because the man who drew this, who saw beauty in a simple moment of dancing in the street, that's the real you, the you that was always there waiting to be found. I don't deserve a second chance. Maybe not. But Ghost deserves to have his family back together." She smiled slightly. "He's been crying every time he sees your empty chair in my art classes." Killian looked at the dog, who was watching them both with hopeful eyes. "You're still teaching?" "At a small studio here in Paris, mostly refugees and troubled kids." "Art. Therapy translates in any language." She hesitated. "They need more teachers, people who understand pain and healing." Hope bloomed in his chest. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a chance to keep becoming the man I always saw in you." She reached across the table and took his hand. "The man I fell in love with even before I knew who he really was. I'm still that man who lied to you," he warned, "who hurt people." "No," she said firmly. "You're the man who told me the truth when it could have cost you everything, who risked his life to save me and my father, who chose love over power." She squeezed his hand. "The question is, who do you want to be now?" Killian looked at their joined hands, at Ghost's happy face, at the artists painting in the square outside. He thought about the scared little boy who used to draw buildings to escape his violent home. The angry young man who'd chosen power over peace, the hardened enforcer who'd forgotten how to feel. Then he thought about the man who'd fallen in love with an art teacher, who'd adopted a scarred dog, who'd chosen truth over lies even when it hurt. "I want to be someone worthy of a second chance," he said finally. "Someone worthy of your love. Then start by showing me your sketches," she said, smiling that smile that had first cracked his frozen heart. "And maybe later we can go dancing." "In the rain," Ghost barked happily, as if approving this plan. Outside, the Paris sky was clearing, sunlight breaking through the clouds. Like light breaking through darkness, like love breaking through fear, like hope breaking through pain. Killian opened his sketchbook and began to share his art, his heart, his truth with the woman who had taught him that even the darkest soul could learn to love. And somewhere in that small Paris cafe, surrounded by art and love and second chances, a former gangster finally found his way home. 6 months passed in Paris, like a beautiful dream. Killian and Emilia took things slowly, rebuilding trust day by day. They worked together at the Art Therapy Center, where Killian discovered he had a special way with the toughest cases, the angry teenagers, the hardened street kids, the ones who thought they were too broken to be fixed. "You understand them," Emilia said one day, watching him help a young boy who'd escaped a war zone. The boy wouldn't talk to anyone else, but he opened up to Killian through his drawings. "I was them," Killian admitted. "Angry, lost, thinking violence was the only answer." Their apartment was small but filled with art now. Emilia's paintings, Killian's sketches, and their students' work. Ghost had his own corner with a bed, but he preferred to sleep between them, as if making sure his family stayed together. One evening, while they were walking home through the cobblestone streets, Killian's phone rang. "It was Marco, boss," he said, sounding worried. "We've got trouble. Some of Davidson's old crew are making moves back home. They're talking about revenge." Killian felt the old tension return to his shoulders. "Handle it. They're not just targeting the syndicate. They're asking questions about you." About her. Emilia, who had walked ahead with Ghost, turned back when she realized Killian had stopped. The sunset painted her in golden light, and the sight of her made his heart ache. He couldn't let his old life touch her again. "I'll call you back," he told Marco. That night, after Emilia fell asleep, Killian sat by the window, making plans. He had enough money to disappear completely, to send Emilia and Ghost somewhere safe, to... "Stop thinking so loud," Emilia said, coming to sit beside him. "I know that look. Something's wrong." He told her about Marco's call, expected her to be scared, to want to run. Instead, she took his hand and led him to their small kitchen, put on the coffee, sat him down like they were about to discuss lesson plans. "Now," she said, "tell me everything. And then we'll figure it out together." "Together?" He stared at her. "Emilia, these people are dangerous." "So were you once," she smiled. "But love changed you, and now you're changing others through art, through understanding. Maybe that's the answer. You can't heal everyone with art therapy." "No, but we can. Give them a choice like you had." She squeezed his hand. "Call Marco, tell him to find the youngest ones in Davidson's crew, the ones who still have a chance. Tell him we have space in our program." Killian looked at her in amazement. "You want to offer art therapy to gang members? Why not? It's working for our other students. And who better to teach them than someone who's walked their path and found another way?" She made it sound so simple. And maybe it was. Maybe the answer to violence wasn't more violence. Maybe it was showing people another way to live, to express their pain, to find beauty in the darkness. The next day they called a meeting at the art center. Their small team of teachers and counselors listened as Killian explained the situation. Instead of fear, he saw excitement in their eyes. Ideas started flowing. "We could start a special program," their head counselor said. "Focus on trauma and redemption through art." "My brother works with troubled youth in New York," another teacher offered. "He could help identify candidates." Emilia beamed at Killian. "See? Sometimes the best way to fight darkness is to offer light." Over the next few weeks, something amazing happened. Marco sent the first group of young gang members to Paris. They arrived angry, suspicious, expecting a trap. But slowly, through art and patience and understanding, they began to change. One boy, only 16, cried when he finally drew his father who had abandoned him. A girl who'd been running drugs since she was 12 discovered she had a talent for sculpture. Their pain and rage found new expression through colors and shapes instead of violence. Not all of them changed. Some returned to their old lives, but enough stayed. Enough found a new path. That word began to spread. The program grew. Other cities wanted to copy it. One evening, Killian found Amelia in their tiny home studio, painting. The canvas showed a dark figure stepping into light, surrounded by swirling colors. "It's you," she said when she caught him looking. "The moment you chose love over fear." He wrapped his arms around her, breathing in the scent of paint and home and second chances. "I choose it every day," he whispered. Ghost padded in, carrying his leash hopefully. They both laughed. "Walk first," Amelia decided. "Then dinner. I'm teaching you to cook that pasta sauce properly if it kills me." As they walked through their neighborhood, greeting other artists and shop owners who had become friends, Killian marveled at how much had changed. A year ago, he'd been feared throughout the city. Now he was just another artist in Paris, holding hands with the woman he loved, living a life he never thought possible. His phone buzzed, a photo from Marco. Their newest student had just finished his first painting. The boy was smiling, really smiling, maybe for the first time in years. "Another soul saved," Amelia said. Looking at the photo, "Another heart healed," Killian corrected, pulling her close, "because that's what love did. It healed hearts, changed lives, turned monsters into artists, made the impossible possible." And as the Paris sunset painted the sky in colors no artist could capture, a former gangster walked home with his family, carrying not a gun, but hope. Hope and a very wet dog leash, because Ghost had decided to play in the fountain again. Some things, thankfully, never changed. 1 year to the day since Killian had first walked into Amelia's art class back home, they stood in their Paris apartment surrounded by paintings. It was their first gallery show, a joint exhibition featuring work by them and their students. The small space was packed. Art critics mingled with reformed gang members. Wealthy collectors chatted with teenage refugees. Ghost wandered through, the crowd accepting pets and treats, the unofficial mascot of their healing arts program. "Can you believe this?" Amelia whispered, squeezing Killian's hand. She looked beautiful in a simple blue dress, her hair styled casually, a splash of paint still on her cheek from helping a student earlier. Killian looked at the walls. His architectural drawings hung next to Amelia's paintings. Their students' work told stories of pain and hope, darkness and light. In the center was their shared masterpiece, a massive canvas they'd worked on together, showing a city at dawn, shadows giving way to sunrise. "Mr. Reyes?" They turned to see Tommy, the boy who'd painted the prison cell back home. He'd flown in specially for the show. Now 17, he stood taller, more confident, his own portfolio under his arm. "I got accepted to art school," Tommy announced. Full scholarship. Amelia hugged him while Killian tried not to show how emotional this made him. Tommy had been one of their first success stories, from gang recruit to aspiring artist. "Your work deserves to be seen," Killian said, clasping the boy's shoulder. The gallery door opened and James Carter walked in. Amelia ran to hug her father, who'd flown in from New York. He looked different too, less corporate, more relaxed. "The Foundation's board is impressed," he told them after greetings. "They want to expand the program to 5 more cities." The Foundation had been his idea, taking money that had once fueled violence and using it to fund art therapy programs for at-risk youth. Redemption through creativity, they called it. Marco arrived next, looking strange in casual clothes instead of his usual suit. He'd left the syndicate 6 months ago, now running security for the Foundation. Ghost bounded over to greet him. The dog still considered him part of the family. "Latest reports," Marco said quietly to Killian. "Davidson's old crew is completely disbanded. Most of the young ones are in programs like yours now. The rest," he shrugged. "Let's just say they're not causing trouble anymore." Killian nodded. The old world was fading, like a dark dream replaced by a brighter reality. A commotion at the door drew their attention. The little boy Killian had helped, the war refugee who wouldn't speak, rushed in with his parents. He was talking now, excited to show them his painting in the exhibition. "That's the real miracle," Emilia said softly. "Not just helping them heal, but watching them help others heal too." She was right. Their students were already becoming teachers themselves, spreading the message that art could save lives, that beauty could grow from darkness, that love could change even the hardest heart. Later that night, after the crowds had gone, Killian and Emilia sat on their small balcony. Ghost lay at their feet, tired from all the attention. The lights of Paris twinkled below, and somewhere a street musician played soft jazz. "I have something for you," Killian said, pulling out a small box. Emilia opened it to find a simple gold ring, not flashy, like his old world, but elegant and real, like their love. "A year ago," he said, "you offered me a second chance. You saw good in me when I couldn't see it in myself. You taught me that love isn't a weakness, it's the greatest strength we have." Tears shone in her eyes as he took her paint-stained hands in his. "I can't promise you a perfect life," he continued, "but I can promise to choose love every day, to help others find their light, like you helped me find mine, to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of your heart." "You already are," she whispered. Ghost sat up, watching them expectantly, tail wagging. "Emilia Carter," Killian said, his voice rough with emotion, "will you marry me?" She answered by pulling him into a kiss that tasted of joy and paint and promises. Inside their apartment, the paintings watched silently, testimonies to pain overcome, darkness transformed, love triumphant. Outside, Paris continued its eternal dance of light and shadow, art and life, endings and beginnings. And in a small balcony garden, under stars that had seen countless stories of redemption, a former gangster held his future in his arms while their dog tried to join the hug. Some said a man couldn't change his nature, that a heart once darkened could never find light. That love wasn't strong enough to overcome the past. But they were wrong, because sometimes the greatest masterpieces come from the darkest pain. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories start with a lie, but end with deeper truth. And sometimes, all it takes is one person believing in you, one chance at redemption, one heart brave enough to love without limits. Killian held Emilia close, feeling the ring between them, knowing this was just the beginning of their story. There would be challenges ahead, battles still to fight, souls still to save, but they would face it together. The artist and the enforcer, the light and the shadow, the teacher and the student. Two hearts made stronger by trust rebuilt, love rekindled, faith rewarded, and Ghost, of course, always Ghost, because every great love story needs a happy dog. The end.